There's an oak tree at the governor's mansion with a plaque, and this was planted, I think, in 2003 when Mike Foster was governor. But the plaque, and I had an opportunity to read it for the first time a couple of weeks ago. It says, "College begins with early childhood education." And I'm sure that Cecil Picard had something to do with that plaque being there. And of course, the symbology there is that that tree started from an acorn. And it is a large and growing, vibrant live oak tree now. But that sums up why early childhood education is necessary and important, and again, why it's a top priority for my second term with respect to new investments in education. I believe that early childhood education should be seen as the start of a pipeline to prosperity for children across Louisiana. We know that we have too much poverty in our state. We know that it's been in certain families and in certain communities for many, many generations. If we ever want to break that cycle, if we ever want our children to have more opportunity and more prosperity, it starts with early childhood education. Kathleen Blanco used to say that education is the true enemy of poverty. She is exactly right. You know, Cecil Picard used to say that, and he was a state he was a state education superintendent and a big champion for early childhood education. But he used to say, starting kindergarten without pre-K is like starting a 100-yard dash, but you're 10 yards behind everybody else. We know that 90% of brain development happens before a child is 4. We also know that if children are behind a grade level when they start school, they may never catch up. And it's very hard to catch them up. And the challenge we have in Louisiana is that 30% of our kids start kindergarten behind their peers in the rest of the country. We actually do a pretty good job, about as good a job as anybody in the country, educating those kids who start school ready to learn. We have too many of our kids who start and they're not ready to learn. And we don't catch them up very well, but no other state does either. You may know that Donna, my wife, is an elementary music teacher, and she was also a member of the commission. This is one of her top concerns as well. And she asked me to apologize. She wasn't able to join us today. I know that we can give our children the resources that they need to access a quality education, which is why my commitment is reflected in the budget proposed last week. For the current year, we increased our investment for early childhood education by $20 million. We've committed $25 million more on top of that for the current year. Plus, there's an additional $33 million that we're going to have over the next 3 years. So these are the first real positive investments in early childhood education in a decade, and it's going to put us on the right path. And this is an effort that everyone can support, no matter their political party. And I know that Senator Carter mentioned this a while ago. This really isn't a partisan issue. Everybody supports doing better by our children with early childhood education. These children are not Republicans and Democrats. They are our brothers and sisters. And that's why we have to do better by them. This issue needs to be addressed from multiple fronts, including state and local government, the business community, advocates, and parents, and that's why it's so exciting to see everybody here. We have folks here representing all of those categories. And New Orleans, by the way, is a prime example of where this is happening. And I know the mayor couldn't be with us today, but Mayor LaToya Cantrell and the New Orleans City Council stepped up to the plate with $3 million for early childhood education in the city of New Orleans. That is huge, and I hope it will serve as an example for what other local governments can do to better fund early childhood education and make it available. I want to thank Entergy, the sponsor for today's event, for being part of the solution and leading the way for other businesses to follow. The bottom line is it's never too early to invest in our children, and the dividends will pay off for generations to come. Providing more early childhood education opportunities are going to help us ensure more of our children have a strong start. So I ask everyone to join me. Let's work together to make this happen, not just today and not just this year, but next year and the year after and the year after, because if we don't maintain this special effort for at least a generation, it's not going to work. And probably we should never stop but we know we have to do this for at least a generation for it to have the impact that we all want it to have. So thank you all for coming out today. I wish everyone a wonderful Valentine's Day on Friday. You men, don't forget. Don't forget. And I look forward to a good, productive legislative session that's going to start on March the 9th. So God bless each and every one of you, and thank you so much.
We are looking at a fantastic early childhood education center that is helping kids from 0 to 4 get ready for kindergarten, and I'm very supportive of all these kind of efforts. I currently am serving on appropriations, and I think we can't do enough. We can always do more for our kids. I'm a mom of 4 kids, and I have a grandchild who's about to turn 8, and I just know how important it is to, as a mom, but I also know it's important for every kid in this state to have options to start developing their brains. We need to continue to invest in early childhood education, that everyone should, and some of these matching programs that exist where private businesses give money and we get state matched dollars, I think those are fantastic. And I hope that we can appropriate as much money as possible in the budget towards early childhood education. And the people in their communities should look for ways to support this because it will help us in the long run as a state.
There are approximately 45,000 constituents who I represent. Early education is my #1 priority as well, and so I'm working closely with the governor's administration. Serve on the appropriations committee, where it's important that we allocate and appropriate the monies that we need for early education. And this past week, the governor proposed $25 million in new spending in early education on top of the tens of millions of dollars investment he made last term. And then he's also trying to structure $33 million over a period of time in additional new investment. And I stand with him and stand ready to support the administration, not only doing that money, but even more money towards early education.
The biggest challenge probably would be funding it at this point. I think that pretty much we're all in favor of providing early childhood ed, dual enrollment, and increasing teacher pay. But the challenge is funding it and finding that balance level so that we're not overburdening the taxpayers while still providing those services that we can to the public. Dual enrollment and teacher pay is 3 of our top priorities this year. We will continue to work on that, and hopefully we can make some good strides in those areas.
For everyone to recognize that while we have a lot of political things that go on and philosophical differences from Republicans and Democrats, this is one that we all stand firmly behind, regardless of your political affiliation. We all recognize that early childhood education is critically important. Regardless of your socioeconomic background, regardless of your race, your religion, your party affiliation. If there's one thing that we agree upon, it is making sure that our young people get the best opportunity at a good education. With early childhood education, we fix so many other problems. We give our children an opportunity to get a head start on a good education. The money that's spent on the front end far outweighs the expenses on the back end of making sure these kids are educated. Someone once said that if you think education is expensive, try the lack of education.
We're celebrating Early Ed Week, celebrating the importance of early childhood education in Louisiana. We know that 90% of brain development starts before the age of 4. And it's really important that we fund early education so that children have a head start before they enter kindergarten. It's really important that legislators continue to work in a bipartisan way to provide funding for early care and education because it really benefits everybody in our community. It's the direct path out of poverty for children, education, and that's why it's really important that they have a head start between birth and 4 years old.
We serve parents and families often from low-income backgrounds. Having critical, high-quality child care is important because as parents go out in the community to work, they need to make sure that their kid or children are in a place where actual learning's going on, that they feel safe and secure with so they can focus on their jobs. When we have those gaps in quality child care, we see that parents often have to stop working, and that impacts not only their family, but their income and the business community's revenues as well. So we recognize that all of this is connected, so we make sure that all kids have access to quality early childhood care. Excited always to see the governor here, excited to see other elected officials here. We've been working on this a while now, and it's good to see the momentum continuing to build, and I think the governor has been a leading voice for that, and we're going to continue to rally around him and other elected officials to make sure that the parents who we serve also understand that there's some opportunities to get their children in quality early childhood seats, and we're going to continue to work for them.
Finding childcare for 2 infants simultaneously has been extremely hard for me. Finding childcare for 2 children who have IFSPs and are considered disabled was even more of a hurdle. A lot of centers were struggling with understanding that they had special needs, that they needed feeding assistance, and that they would also need therapeutic services while in the center. I first found out about the CCAP program actually when a news article came out stating that the funding would be like waitlisted now. And so while I was still pregnant and my babies were in utero, here I was trying to figure out how to get myself on the list so that we could have a spot, so that once they did get to our name on the list, we'd be able to actually get care and get assistance. And by my children having an IFSP, we were given a bit of priority, but I do know that there are many, many parents still on the list waiting for
childcare. The lack of childcare really affects the population in the greater New Orleans areas because it prevents parents to have a safe, loving, nurturing environment while they're working. So as a working parent myself, back in the day, it was always comforting to know that if my child was well cared for and learning and moving forward, that I didn't worry about them at work and I could focus my effort at work on the tasks at hand. So things that we're currently working on to close the gaps in childcare access is funding. We need funding for seats, especially in the 0 to 3-year-old range. So children that get a great start in quality early childhood care and education, it's been shown that they enter pre-K and kindergarten ready to learn. And when you enter ready to learn, you're able to keep up and continue to learn. One of our works with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading is we know that children learn to read up to 3rd grade, and then from 3rd grade on, they read to learn. So by getting a good fundamental start in education from birth onwards, prepares them for school and a lifelong access to learning. And we know that children that are interested and are enthusiastic about education with early exposure as their brains are developing, that they go on to do great things. And it costs much more later on when they're in middle school or high school to try to catch young adults up to learn to be prepared for college. But if you do that early on, it really opens the world for them.
One of the things that we find a lot is that parents aren't able to actually be employed or be as employed as they would like to be. So in many cases, they're having to work part-time when they would love to be working full-time jobs. Or they can't even afford to keep a job because the cost of childcare is so high that it doesn't make financial sense for them to be in the workforce. So we're leaving so much productivity on the table as a state by not investing enough in childcare. I feel so hopeful about the future. Seeing the governor come on board with over $20 million in new dollars for early education is really critical. And I'm the mother of a young child myself, and so I see firsthand, personally, my parents actually take care of my baby during the day. And knowing that I have a safe place for him to go where he's well loved and nurtured is so important for my ability to go to work every day. And seeing how many parents here have the same ability because of the investments that we've been making as a state is just a beautiful thing.
Our state lags the country in funding, and we need to make this a priority. And this is an issue that cuts across all parties and all organizations, from chambers to economic development organizations to United Way's, the urban leagues involved. So it's really just everyone saying we need to invest in our children. Our chamber believes that there's a huge correlation between lack of funding for early childhood education and probably the highest incarceration rate in the world. And so this is an investment to get kids on the right track at an early age. It's important for our state for a lot of reasons. I mean, business is the customer of education. And so we need a quality workforce, we need a quality economy, we need a good quality of life. And that's why this investment is so important. And that's why we're doing this across the state. That's why we've got Ready Start Jefferson, and we're focusing on our efforts in Jefferson so that as we're leaning on the state for money, Jefferson Parish its government and its businesses are also stepping up and doing the right thing and investing in our children.
We are highlighting the very valuable work that exists in high-quality child care centers like Clara's Little Lambs. It is incredibly important work that we do every single day. Those interactions that happen between teachers and children are the most important work, and the research says that those interactions are what lay the foundation for these children's success later on in life. Invest in early care, high-quality early care and education. The accountability exists. It is a need, and if you want to, right now the state invests less than 0.5% in early care and education. We have to begin to change that. We know it works. We have an accountability system in place to know that your investment, if it is in high quality early care and education, those children are going to be successful. These children are not only the workforce of today, but the workforce of tomorrow.
We have to keep up the work. It's important for us to highlight the successes that we've had in terms of the governor's commitment and the mayor's commitment to make more money available for early care and education, but we can't stop. There's so many more children who need this level of support that's not getting it. I'm very excited about today, but we have to keep the work up to ensure that all of our kids are able to get into quality early care and education setting and move forward to help their families, and more importantly than that, to contribute to the community and make our whole community better. A number of indicators we have not done very well, particularly when you look at things like the kids count data that looks at the well-being of children. We're usually on the bottom rung among states. We've also not done a good job at taking care of our health. World Health Organization data indicates we're 50 among states. So there's a number of challenges that we have in the state that we can address by providing more support to our children when they're very, very young. And when we provide support to children from 0 to 8 and children in child care, we also help their families. So we're building the capacity of Louisiana families to do more and to do better.
We live in a state where 78% of the people who live here were born here. So quite literally, our children are our future, and when we invest in our children, we're investing in the future of Louisiana in a very literal sense. So many families in this state are unable to work or unable to prosper the way that they otherwise could because of lack of access to childcare. Childcare is one of the biggest reasons, lack of access to childcare is one of the biggest reasons why people are having less kids. I think the thing that concerns me is that as a country, we're at a 30-year low for birth rates. As a state, 10% of our population of children has dropped over the last 10 years. A lot of that is because people can't afford to have kids, because the lack of access to childcare, it disrupts work, it disrupts their ability to take care of their family. People are paying what they pay for mortgages for childcare. And it's not that it should be cheap, it's that it should be affordable and it should be quality. And as a state, we have to invest in that. The same way we invest in affordable housing, the same way we invest in other types of programs like that that allow people to prosper. Childcare is that. Childcare is education. We have decided that K-12 education is a universal right, and it doesn't matter whether you're rich, whether you're poor, whether you're white, whether you're black, whether you're a U.S. citizen by birth, or whether you're an immigrant. We have all decided that K-12 education is an essential public good. Childcare is education. It's not childcare and education, it is education. For the first 4 years of a child's life, that's when the 90% of their brain development happens. And in those first 4 years, our brains make millions of neuropathic connections. And it's literally a use it or lose it. And so if you, as your brain starts to learn these skills, as your brain starts to make these connections, if you don't foster them, if you don't cultivate them, your brain decides you don't need them to survive, and it loses them, which is why, as an adult, it's much harder for me to learn French than it would have been if I had learned that when I was 2 years old. That's why it's a lot harder for adults to learn lots of things like that that are much more complex, because your brain is much more malleable at that time. And so imagine what we're missing as a society if a child doesn't have access to quality care between the ages of 0 and 4, and they don't have a chance to develop fully. It makes sense to sort of the outcomes you start to see for those kids. It makes sense the gaps when they come into school, and it makes sense that it's really hard to catch up. And we have so much data to show that once a kid falls behind, it's really, really hard to catch them up. And this is the most important time. This is the best investment we can make. We spend a lot of time trying to remediate kids when they get older and they're in middle school and they're high school, when the investment would be much better made here in the earliest stages while their brains are still developing at the most important stage of their life. It's frankly the best investment we can make as a state or as a country or as a society. It's you look at all the societies that are investing in their youngest children, and they're thriving because those kids are having the opportunity to grow up with the resources they need to be able to thrive.
We know it's an economic starter for us, and so that we know that when we invest in children, we can get 13% return on investment for every dollar that we spend. And what we know is that it costs our state $1 billion every year in loss in revenue because families don't have access to high quality early care and education. And what we also know is it costs our businesses in the state about $860 million as well because they don't have workers that have reliable quality care and education.
What we're doing here today is giving voice to Louisiana's working families. We refer to them as ALICE. They are asset limited, income constrained, and employed, and they want the very best for their children. So we're giving voice to those families who are finding it very difficult to access affordable, high-quality early care and education for their children. And we are convening legislators, school board members, our Bessie board members, not-for-profit leaders, community leaders, and our business community to understand what's at stake here. For those families, high-quality early care and education for their kids is an opportunity to ensure that they will start school ready to learn, that they will graduate on time, and that they will fulfill a lifelong commitment to be productive, successful citizens.
Our children are important, and so they're so important that we should invest everything we can to give them the best possible chance at a bright future. And today we're able to celebrate certainly our governor's commitment to that, but also business leaders and other elected officials, and also amazing partners like Entergy who stepped up and offered significant resources to entice other businesses to join our cause. So we're here to kind of rally the troops and say, let's really focus on how important our children are.
It's extremely exciting. I'm very proud to be chosen as the only center the governor visited in the entire state during Early Education Week is a big honor. My children were overexcited. They were wondering what a governor was, what he does, and it was exciting for them to have the opportunity to meet him.